Are you going as far as saying that all these money guys, all these big companies want to find a way to get access to that $75 trillion of natural resources, which, by the way, while you're doing this, I'm online calculating if the natural resources of Russia combined is more than every country in NATO combined, which it looks like it is, if not, they're slightly above him, because the second biggest country with the most natural resources that's in NATO, there isn't one in top 10, just so you know that. Not one country in the top 10, Rob, if you can look it up, top 50 countries with natural resources. So in order for you to get access to those $75 trillion, it will not happen with Putin. So you got to find a way to replace him, bring somebody in that you select. And once that person's in, that'll give you the way in to get those resources, similar to how they did it with Ukraine, because Zelensky will give you, they're also second, third, and all these natural resources that, Ukraine's got a lot of, things that the world can take advantage of. And they couldn't do with the guy in 2013, 2014, and this was a fall. So the same playbook with Ukraine, the same playbook with Pakistan, they want to do with Russia to get access to the money?
Oh, completely.
You think that's it?
I mean, that's not all of it, but that's it. I mean, in the sense that there are other things that the Blob is concerned about, Western Hemisphere, the rush for Africa, it's not the only thing, but it's by far the biggest. It is the
Is that the number one reason?
Yes. Yes.
And who is the people that want access to that $75 trillion?
Well, you should look at, folks can read a great book called Casino Moscow, which is inadvertently about, George Soros and how he went from a millionaire to a billionaire. I mean, George Soros is the largest.
Currency manipulation and what?
I mean, George Soros went from a millionaire to a billionaire by being effectively an insider trader on NATO, CIA, State Department, DoD operations. When he started the Open Society Foundation in 1979 as a tax loophole for his kids, basically, then Reagan came to power in the 1980s, created this National Endowment for Democracy, basically parked all of the old CIA activities that were banned after the Church Committee hearing into CIA-intermediated NGOs and foundations. George Soros tagged along with that and started basically investing from his New York hedge fund, which was focusing on foreign currency speculation, on the rise and fall of currencies that his foundation was partnering with the State Department and NATO. So he had, 5 years, 3 years, 6 months advance notice on the direction of every currency before he bet on it, because his foundation was getting money from the U.S. government, was liaising, was serving as the incubator for these rent-a-riot mobs, which you can argue were done for a sort of noble purpose if you want to talk about, Hungary or Poland or any number of the revolutions that took place in the 1980s with open society support. But the fact is when the 1990s hit, it was George Soros and Bill Browder's private investment firms, their private little hedge funds, their foreign currency speculation, but also they were buying up the portfolio companies. They were buying up these assets because Russia from 1991 to 1999 did not have a sovereign government. It was the 51st state, just like Ukraine is now, because Boris Yeltsin was the CIA's man in Russia. You can look up a great article called Spyless Coups by the Washington Post by David Ignatius in 1997, where he even walks through how Boris Yeltsin was faxing the CIA's cutout organization, the National Endowment for Democracy, in 1993, effectively asking the CIA for permission to bomb his own parliament building when his own government opposed his shock therapy sell-off of the $2 trillion in sovereign wealth that the Soviet Union held off to Wall Street and London bankers like George Soros's firm, which made its money in Russia at that time. Watch the original Austin Powers movie for how they talked about Russia, in 1995 at that time. There's a great scene where there's a Russian general who appears in the British intelligence lab after Austin Powers gets unfrozen, and the British intelligence it has to convince Austin Powers, no, Russia is the good guys now, because they were our guys under the Yeltsin thing. Look up. If you want, you can look up another movie called Spinning Boris, starring Jeffrey Goldblum. which is based on the true story of how the State Department, the intelligence services, and Hollywood descended on the Russian internal election of 1996 when Yeltsin was polling at 6% in the vote in order to prop up a drunk, half-dead Yeltsin to win the election that he was losing in order to keep the looting going before the Russian stock market crashed 90% of its value, and Putin arose in the ashes of that, and then turned rogue as many nationalist, as many former, sort of trusted heirs of the U.S. foreign policy establishment frequently do.
Wow.
But what I'm getting at here is the high watermark of the U.S. empire. And I don't say this pejoratively. I want a U.S. empire, but it has to benefit the American homeland, and this is the big divide right now. But the Francis Fukuyama unipolar moment, the great moment that is our sort of North Star for all of our diplomacy, is the 1990s, when there was no other global hegemon. China hadn't risen economically. Russia hadn't reasserted itself geopolitically or militarily. It's that 1990s moment when we looked like we were finally going to get control over Eurasia before we spread ourselves too thin after 9/11, and before 4 years after that, Putin began to turn against the U.S. blob and use the energy assets that Russia sat on and the military industry that it sat on to make Russia sovereign again. And that's what kicked off this whole turf war. First, it only impacted Republican companies. This is why Mitt Romney was on the hawkish side against Obama. There was that famous debate line, where Obama, during the 2012 election, cycle, had that line, you're being too hard on Russia, effectively. He said, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. Well, that was because that had only impacted the Republican interests in Georgia and Azerbaijan at that point. It hadn't yet hit the Democrat side of the blob, Ukrainian energy interests that Soros and that network had all invested in and made these major gas investments in, while gas was the big transition fuel of the Green Revolution. So once 2014, the counter coup happened with Donbass and Crimea, there became this uniparty alliance in terms of reconquering eastern Ukraine and reconquering Crimea. And then Trump sort of sashayed his way into the middle of that and made enemies of both the traditional GOP right,
how much, but think about it. Okay, so who lost money? Who loses money if Putin stays? Who loses business? The whole thing when the Ukraine was destroyed and everything that happened to the state, and then you read this article, BlackRock and, I think it was Chase, $400 billion to rebuild, Ukraine. Which, holy shit, $400 billion contract? What was it? I want to say it was BlackRock and Chase, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase.
Yeah, there you go. So I remember it correctly. So $500 billion, it's $400 billion, whatever, to rebuild the place. Okay. So who else? Like, where is the business model? Is it these Vanguard, State Street, BlackRock, Goldman? Are those the guys that are missing out on the opportunity of Russia because the guy to get through them is Putin?
Yes, this is who determines who's in the DOD and who's in the state and who's in the CIA. Look up the relationship between the Donilon brothers and the Biden administration. Look up Tom Donilon, BlackRock Investment Institute. And actually, if you can pull up in a separate tab, before you load that, look up Mike Donilon, Biden advisor. And I just want to show you this pair of brothers here real quick. So Mike Donilon is the right-hand man of Joe Biden basically since the 1980s. He's the inner sanctum of the White House policy advisory and political advisory. Now, Mike Donilon's brother is a guy named Tom Donilon. So if you go over to that tab that we just pulled up, just pull up Tom Donilon's bio. There you go. BlackRock. We'll do that one. So just if you can zoom in so that I can see it and we can just go through this. Okay. So this is the chairman of the BlackRock Investment Institute. This determines where the allocations are made by BlackRock and I know it's a little bit less than the $10 trillion of assets under management because a lot of that is in holding, but it's still effectively billions, trillions of investment dollars. And this is the guy who's the chairman of that. Now, so this is a banker, right? This is a guy who's got thousands of portfolio companies that span everything, right? BlackRock.
I want to read this and I want to come to you. So Washington Post called him an advisor to Biden since 81. He has been described as Biden's conscience, alter ego, and shared brain.
Mm-hmm.
That's this guy.
That's this guy's brother. That's this guy. That's Mike Donilon. So like while Mike Donilon is the shared conscience, the brain, the political shadow cabinet, the brother is in charge of all investments at BlackRock. It's a family business. So, and I want to just sketch this out because this sort of gets to what's at stake and who's driving this here. So you look at this and you say, okay, chairman of BlackRock, well, that's an economic thing, right? That's like a free market, just portfolio companies that happen to be owned by a private equity firm, because they own the copper companies, they own the aluminum companies, they own the oil and gas companies, or at least they have major equity stakes in all of these. Well, what did he do before becoming effectively the top banker at BlackRock? Well, he was the national security advisor to Obama. That's an intelligence job, a defense job, and a statecraft job. He chaired the cabinet of the National Security Principles Committee. He was responsible for the coordination and integration of the administration's foreign policy, intelligence, and military efforts. So once again, all three pillars of the Blob: diplomacy, defense, intelligence, State Department, DOD, CIA. He was the coordinator of those three things, and now he is the banker whose job is to profit off of the activities of that battering ram to clear the way for his portfolio companies in order to make sure that they have territorial control over the assets that can be extracted or mined in the region, in order to make sure that the government in place in that country, whether that's Georgia or Poland or Ukraine or Venezuela, make sure that the government there is ensuring favorable commercial conditions for the operating companies, that the export markets are secured for their products and services, and and keep going through it, right? He was previously, he also chaired the Obama-Biden transition at the U.S. State Department. So this is not a banker. This is a blob apex predator who then becomes the banker, in the sense that this is the same sort of insider trading phenomenon that I'm describing, but this is what determines who Mike Donilon is going to coordinate with Joe Biden in terms of who's running the CIA, who's running the DOD, who's running the State Department, who are the political appointees who will maximize the profits of the BlackRock Investment Institute. And the BlackRock Investment Institute has a keen eye on all of these things because it's making its investments on the basis of the current and future anticipated activity of the biggest battering ram in the world, the U.S. military, CIA, and State Department apparatus.
Okay, so devil's advocate, somebody be on the other side and says, I mean, look, you're going to have to hire people from those backgrounds because they have the right contacts, the right relationships. You're going to be protected long term, just like when somebody eventually, like a Amazon, Bezos is getting so high up, he's got to go hire somebody that was a former head of the IRS, was a former head of this and former head of that, because now you're a trillion-dollar company, and those are the guys that you got to go after because they got the right contacts. To their argument, is there anything wrong with hiring people like this?
There's nothing wrong with hiring people like this. But when it's foreign policy for personal profit, everything turns on its head. What if what's best for BlackRock is not actually best for the American people? But now you have White House policy being formulated to maximize what's best for BlackRock. This is the big divide between the interests of the American empire and the American homeland. I do agree that the empire is a good thing to have and maintain and consolidate and protect and maybe even at times expand. I don't know that we would have had the middle-class jobs that we had in the 20th century. I don't know that we would have had Coke and Pepsi and Walmart and ExxonMobil and all of these things unless we had CIA activity that was creating favorable markets through its political activity, unless we had State Department pressure, and unless we had from time to time military or paramilitary activity spearheaded by the DOD. I don't know that we would have had the economic miracle without that. The issue is globalization, when it hit a certain maturity point in the whether you want to peg it the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, at some point, what became good for the empire stopped having a trickle-down economic benefit to the American homeland.
Globalization as a new world order.
Globalization as in the internationalization of markets, supply chains, and labor. So, for example, we used to have the manufacturing miracle, right? We used to have, everything from Pittsburgh and the steel mines and Ohio and the factories. This manufacturing belt of the heartland became the Rust Belt as multinational corporations began to open up so many export markets in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, that companies started to make more money exporting to foreign populations than to the U.S. It began as we started to influence foreign governments to be able to have favorable operating conditions there. We began to put our factories there, so that you didn't have a regional hub hiring 10,000 people for this manufacturing plant in Ohio or in West Virginia or in Michigan. We're now going to Vietnam or Malaysia or China or a plant in Chile. You started to have the actual people being hired being foreign workforces. Everything was done to maximize total shareholder value, in compliance with this. It's one thing to be unabashed, and I'm a free market capitalist guy. I like dyed in the wool. I still believe in that. But you do have to reconcile what the long arm of statecraft can do in conjunction with an internationalist scenario where these companies don't have loyalty to the country. They have loyalty to their shareholders. Many times these shareholders themselves are international or they're London-based. And so this rift has opened up where the state, we will give $900 billion to the Pentagon and $50 billion to U.S. aid and, $72 billion to the CIA. And they will overthrow a government. They will take control of a foreign country's media and its parliamentarian system and its judiciary system, and we'll have a whole political institution, vassal state control, and we'll spend hundreds of billions of dollars to do that, so that these private multinational corporations make tens of billions of dollars, but we don't get the jobs. We don't get the local factories and regional economic development hubs. Hi, this is Mike Benz. You can connect with me on Connect for any questions that you have on internet censorship, foreign policy, national security, the Blob, or if you want to know what a particular institution is doing that you may have seen or have questions about in terms of its control over the information ecosystem. So connect with me on Connect.
If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.